wash my hair, that's why.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our artist talk with Minny Lee. If you did miss it in the chat, we're just asking that you put yourselves on mute for the artist talk today. And if you have any questions for Minny, you can direct them to me through the chat.
Put it on mute.
Okay, so if it's your first time joining us here, can I just get a quick thumbs up, everybody? Am I coming in okay? Can you hear me? Yeah, great, okay. So whether you're a fan or familiar with Treehouse or a supporter of Minny Lee and her artwork, we thank you for coming via Zoom today into our shop to hear from Minny. You know, the last year plus, year and a half now going on, we haven't been able to do our usual artist receptions, opening receptions, when we do have a new artist showing work in the space. But one of the silver linings is we started doing these artist talk series, which has been a really great way for our exhibiting artists to be able to elaborate about the work, interface directly with an audience, and just give some more context. And we've really facilitated some great conversations, and we're super excited to have Minny today. So a little bit about our artist today, who I'm sure most of you are already very familiar with. But Minny Lee is a multimedia artist who works with photography, video, poetry, and artist books. Her work contemplates the concepts of time and space and nature of multiplicity. So Minny was born and raised in South Korea. She moved to the US, obtained Master of Art in Art History from the City College of New York, CUNY, and Master of Fine Arts in Advanced Photographic Studies from ICP Bard. Minny's been awarded a fellowship from the Reflections Masterclass in Europe. She's also participated in residency programs at Halsnoy Cluster in Norway, Dot's Museum of Art in South Korea, and the Vermont Studio Center. Minny's work has been exhibited at the Dot's Museum of Art, Center for Fine Art Photography, the East Hawaii Cultural Center, Espacio El Dorado, Lishui Photo Festival, Gwangju Design Biennale, among many other venues. Many of you might be familiar with Minny's books. So Minny Lee's artist books are in the collection of the International Center of Photography Library, the New York Public Library, Poetry Center, Amon Carter Museum Library, special collections of the University of Arizona libraries, special collections of Stanford University libraries, and other private and public collections. Minny moved to Honolulu, Hawaii in 2016 after living in the greater New York City area. That's where I first met Minny, when she came as an instructor at the University of Hawaii in Manoa in the photography program there. So I wasn't her student, but I did have the good fortune to overlap with Minny for a couple of years during her time there. And I can say that her presence brought a lot of energy to that building and that program. And she's continued to be a very important presence in the photography and art community here in Honolulu. So today, Minny is going to be talking about, speaking of that word presence, very aptly, the title of the work that she's going to be speaking about today, the title of the work that's on exhibition right now at Treehouse, is a project called Presence. This is an ongoing self-portrait series that she's been working on since 2010 that intertwines personal memories to the history of a given place. By assuming the roles of both subject and photographer, each photograph becomes a negotiation between the real and surreal, visible and invisible, and internal and external. Okay, that's enough for me today. I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to our star today, who is Minny Lee. And
hello, everybody.
Okay, Minny, you're now the host.
I'm going to share my screen now. This one. Good afternoon, everyone. Before we start the event, I would like to thank Abi Asato, owner of Treehouse, and Drew, Annabelle, Noel, Chris, and Cam for providing this platform for us today. Thank you all for calling in. We have world-renowned photographers here, Linda Connor, Franco Salmuragi, Jinja Kim, Serge, so many others coming in. Thank you very much
Very
for
clearly
being
used.
here. Uh, So I'm gonna show you installation pictures of the place because some of you live far away and probably cannot make it. So this is a tree house in Kakao. And
Not sure that it works or not, but try,
this is
okay?
the exhibition. Two people are not muted. And this is the part of poem I put
This
on
doesn't
the
work.
window. And there are some artist books.
This
And you
doesn't
can
work.
see the outside.
Only this will work.
This is
Do
the
you have
beginning
another
of,
one? You have
Kakao.
another one. Go check. It has to be around.
Before I go forward, can you make yourself muted? I think Shinja 선생님, your audio is on. Shinja Kim, audio is on, Drew.
No.
Not at all.
Okay, so here's the part of the poem that I installed on the window outside, right outside. I can maybe like tilt the window this way. You can kind of see the city of Honolulu.
Sorry.
Side.
Oh,
that's the installation. So I would like to talk about a little bit of my background because I fear that everybody has different childhood that really affect the work and individuals. So I was born and raised in Seoul, but I also at very young age of 2, I went to Daegu down south to live with my grandmother. Then I was back by near Seoul, Seongnan, and then Bucheon. That's where the countryside is. Then I was back by Seoul by 5th grade and graduated from high school there. Then my adulthood, I spent my adulthood in the United States. So I landed in New York and did my undergraduate and graduate, but I lived in New Jersey for most of my time there. And I moved to Hawaii in 2016, but in between I made some trips to overseas. So that's kind of me, being between East and West, going in between two countries and some other countries. But oftentimes people say like, oh, you're Korean or you are US citizen, but I am many things because I was influenced by not only my family, but social condition in Korea, military dictatorship, political upheavals, and then in New York, it was like cultural capital, and it was like so much to see and learn. So fast forward, so that's my childhood, like all years, but I want to start with ICP because that's where I got involved with photography. I learned a lot of different things, but met a lot of wonderful people as well. So I did the internship at the museum and then eventually did a 1-year documentary program there. And even though I studied documentary program, I photographed tree for one assignment. And this tree picture I made before I graduated. And there's a, so there's a photographer, Georgia Furio, I met in ICP. This was during the time I was there, but after I graduated, I did an assistant work for her class, and she saw this tree picture, and she said, Minny Lee, you gotta make these tree pictures. And she nominated for Reflections Masterclass. And this is the image I grabbed from her website. So masterclass was a 2-year program. We meet every 4 months, and we did critiques, and there's assignment. And during this period, I was involved with that, and I really work on the tree pictures for those 2 years. So this is one of the picture from France. For the first year, I was strictly taking picture on my house in New Jersey, and then after 1 year, I traveled to wherever I traveled, I photographed. And this is from my backyard. It's from the midnight. There is a gentle wind. I often do not use a tripod. It's very rarely I use tripod. So the softness is coming from that longer exposure. And this one is from 2010 with the snow. It was beautiful. And people often ask me about colors, but I always tell people, you may see different things from the world, but when you go at night, especially, there's amazing, wonderful colors. So that's that. And then towards the end of my master class there, I did an assignment for, it's called identity theme. I had to come up with a single image or something. So I went to Times Squares and I photographed this picture and this next picture. And it was with a large format camera. And I set up everything and I came with my friend. I asked her to release the shutter. So I was not like this exactly when I arrived in New York City after I graduated from high school, but those clothes are from that period of time. And this, I was kind of projecting myself, like the way I dress and stuff. I'm holding this image of tree from Encounter series. And then towards the end of my meeting, I guess exactly at that meeting, I met Jean-Luc Monterosso, who was the director of Maison Européenne de la Photographie Museum in Paris. And this is what he said to me. I like your tree pictures, but at the end, you want to photograph people. So I said, I like to, but I have a fear of approaching people. And then he said, then photograph yourself first and send me those photos when they're ready. So, okay, maybe I tried to do that because I really want to take picture of people, but I'm always afraid. So then we are access to Santa Maria delle Grazie in Italy from Reflections Master's meeting. And the building was former convent and it was about to turn into the museum. And it was during that period of time, it was cleaned up, but it was very ghostly too. So I was thinking about my childhood and then the place of the history of that building. So these are the pictures I made there. It was with the Pentax 6.7 camera, black and white. I set up in the tripod. I ran upstairs. I had a 10-second with the self timer. And this was my first try of trying to do self-portrait. And then I decided, why not continue? So I continued. And I went to Montauk with a friend of mine and made a few images there. And a lot of these places have military kind of activity during World War II. For instance, in this case, this is a village in Montauk. It was used for the military, but they disguised as a fishing village. And I went to Bethlehem for one of the photo festival. And it was at this banquet day ready for the next event, but nobody was there. And I made this image there. And I visit Hawaii time to time, and I went to Pearl Harbor for the first time. And this is from Pearl Harbor. And this particular image is from my dream. My father passed away in 1996, and I think only 2-3 times he appeared in my dream. And in this dream, I was bleeding, and he was just watching, and I was bleeding, I couldn't stop. And I set up my tripod, and this is film photography, so I didn't know what I'm gonna get out of it. But the dream was so strong that it really made me wanna make picture. And this image is from Asbury Park. I started going to South Jersey shore and wander around at night. And this is from that time. And I returned a couple months ago, and it's totally different now. But back then it felt much more like empty. I returned to master class after I finished the program as a alumni, one of the alumni. And then in the Paris meeting, we had access to photograph inside of this museum. It was Museum of Civilization and non-European civilization. And there are lots of things there, but this is the first time I think I made a really close-up picture. I mean, I could get closer than this, but I was always distant from myself. I guess the fear that I had with the people applied to myself as well. And maybe hard to see myself, but I'm in the crowd looking at the sculpture. This was basement where all the instruments were. In 2013, I was invited to do residency in Norway, and there was a national holiday where everybody wear costumes. So that really struck me. So I borrowed one of the costume and tried to make picture. And this is the effort. So with this one, I was given like 45 minutes to have that costume. So I was kind of really rushing. First of all, putting that costume on took maybe 10 minutes. And then because the director of the residency program had to kind of take the boat back to the larger island. So I was kind of rushing through everything, but at the end, it was not about a single image that kind of struck me, but it was the process of trying to make the picture. So I put that into the video. So back to ICP, I was there a lot, taking classes and doing program and assisting teachers, but then I left for a few years to do the master's thesis, and then I returned 2014 to the MFA program. And during that time, I made mostly videos, not so much pictures, but I'm gonna share this video just for the beginning part. Sorry. So here I'm projecting the cutouts and I'm kind of moving my body. And this gave me the idea for my MFA thesis show. And there's two pictures I'm gonna show before I get to the thesis show. And for my MFA thesis show, I had a solo show, and I visited Daegu, where I grew up with my grandmother. So when I was 2 years old, my parents sent me to my grandmother to live in down south. And then I was there for like 4 years, and I came back. And many years later, 2016, I decided to revisit this place. And this is one of the streets in Daegu. And I was kind of walking around looking for a place where I grew up with my grandmother without having the address. And here I also made a video of that trip, but one day I decided to visit Daegu City, where I used to live with my grandmother and her mother-in-law from age 2 to 6. I don't know why it took me so long to return to the city. On the first day of my visit to the city, I walked around in the evening and heard church bells sound coming from somewhere. My heart was beating because that's my first memory. It's me standing on a hill around sunset time, hearing church bells sound from far. So that church was probably the church person I heard when I was very young, but that's the first memory I remember always. Like I was standing on the hill listening to church bell. So when I went to Daegu and just walking around, and that's the bell sound I heard all of a sudden while I was rolling the video. But that's the only church that could have a bell sound these days because people didn't want to hear noise anymore. So it was kind of coincidence. And when I was graduating from MFA solo show, this was the performance I created and tried to have participation from the viewers. So I gave this box with a lantern and they project onto the ceiling. And motifs are from countryside, like grapes and vines from my childhood. And I would project a video and move around. And this kind of stemmed from the earlier video you watched from New York City. And that's the Walden Pond. I visited with Sang-yeon for the Dots Museum project. and the Dot Museum of Art with Sang Yeonju. She invited me to do the project with the Walden, and she built this Henry David Thoreau's cabin inside the museum, and we decided to do the performance there. So that's from the performance. And when I went to Vermont for the residency, 2018, I continued with the video project, and this time with hugging trees because I photographed trees for so long, but I fear I'm always distant. So I start doing this video, is hugging each tree, and that was an amazing experience. If anybody wanna go out in the nature and hug the trees, you fear something. And this is my last part of the talk. And before I go into the last one, I just was questioning, like while preparing this presentation, I was questioning where is home and where do I belong to? And how do I make sense of this word? Because in the beginning, it was just me taking picture of myself and it's different places, but at the end, I kind of come back to this question. So I'm gonna end my presentation with this video. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minnie. Wow, what a beautiful note to kind of end on. I feel so at peace after watching that last video piece. So first of all, thank you folks for bearing with our technical difficulties at the beginning of the talk. We're an analog photography store, so technology isn't our forte, but I think we've got it ironed out. But let's get back to Minny. So looking through this work, you know, I have a few questions that come to mind. And again, if anyone else has any questions, please just populate them in the chat. We'll make sure everything gets relayed and hopefully discussed. But Minny, to you, my initial question is, whenever I see a series that's self-portrait or an artist who works a lot in self-portrait, you know, there's a number of different motivations there. A lot of times the work can be really personal or biographical. Other times you're inserting yourself as sort of a surrogate or an avatar for maybe some other concept or some other person or persons. And then other times it's maybe fantasy or back to your artist statement, that idea of like internal versus external, and a photograph or a video that's self-portraiture can often be more revealing about what's going on inside of an artist than what we might see otherwise on the surface. So I'm wondering sort of how you arrived at self-portraiture. I know for a lot of people who work in self-portrait, it's because it's like a function of necessity. It's the most available subject is yourself. But I think it definitely goes beyond that, right? So what is this sort of insistence on inserting yourself in front of the lens and continuing to explore this specific venue of photography, videography, image?
I think short answer is that I studied, so I like to continue and finish strong. But the longer answer is there is something very strange about putting yourself in front of camera as a photographer, because you're comfortable. I mean, I'm comfortable when I have camera in front of me and walking around. And I think Diane Arbus said camera gives a license for you to enter another person's life. So with the camera, it's very comfortable. You walk around, you take a picture, and people think you're a photographer, it's fine. But when you put yourself in front of lens, the camera, you also become subject. It's very uncomfortable feeling because I'm aware of my camera, but I'm a photographer too. So I use the self timer with my Pentax 6.7 camera, which I have 10 seconds. So in the beginning, I was kind of busy operating. I set up frame, I run to the other side, you know, within 10 seconds pause, and then shutter release, and I return and I wind the shutter and then take another picture. But that was just the beginning. As time goes by, it became almost like performance. You're performing in front of your camera, but at the same time, you're a photographer. So you're also calculating that. But I'm leaving like chunk of portion for unconsciousness to come or some kind of coincidence to happen. Because of strangely, when I set the camera and I go to the other side, kind of strange things happen, like something that I didn't expect, I cannot have a control of. So I'm being like humble because I don't have any control of anything in outside, and even myself, I don't really have control over. And I try hard to be like whatever in a pose certain way, but at the end, there's a lot of unknown part of this world that I'm kind of submissive to that, this great unknown universe out there. So as I go further and further, I've been doing this for like about 10 years. So from, I think 2 years ago, I started taking pictures of other people without feeling uneasiness. I finally arrived at, to the place where I feel okay to, can I take a picture of you? And I frame it, I feel okay. So I realized that director I mentioned in the beginning, who say, oh, you want to take a picture of people, you start with yourself. That advice was a very good one.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I love that answer. Especially that idea of that sort of dual vulnerability that's specific to a photographer or videographer working with self-portrait. It's like you're vulnerable as the subject, and then you also have this other sense of insecurity as the photographer, relinquishing some element of control over your tool or your instrument. Kind of staying on that idea of just the medium that you've chosen here and self-portraiture, I'm wondering, because some of the work, right, is very obviously personal. You know, you have the video of your revisiting your first memory. And then there's other stuff that seems much more expressive and sort of like almost fantastical, or things that are, you know, I don't want to say less considered, but they come from a, you know, a shorter period of forethought. They're maybe more reactive, more responsive. So I'm wondering, like, through this project, how do you see that balance of sort of like reflection versus discovery when it comes to approaching a subject?
I'm not a very good planner. Like, I know some photographer, they plan everything out and they go out, they get the image they want, but I'm not like that. I have a general idea about what I'm kind of aiming for. Okay, I want to make self-portrait of something, that's for sure. But everything else is very obscure and undecided, because when you go out there, there's a whole new, you know, universe unfolding in front of you in very unexpected way. So also I'm coming from culture. I grew up in Korea during my formative years under the military dictatorship. But you know, in the school and, you know, at a certain context, I can be very rigid. Confucianism kind of influence and strict kind of societal demand. But in my private life, when I read novels, poems, or watching movie, I can go into the whole different world that I can have a lot of fun and imagination. And I have my journals, I kept my journals during that time. So I was living in these two worlds. And during my high school year, I think earlier my high school year, I read a German writer, Hermann Hesse's Damien. And that book has a strong influence on me to these days, because the Hesse described this little boy's life, very comfortable and nice, kind of warmth, kind of youth, and then this very uncomfortable, like violence, kind of, and then there's Cain and Abel comparison. So I always fear that there's a very safe side and fantastical side, but at the same time, there is a realistic side with a harsh, you know, reality out there. So I just feel like that with art, with photography, you can really jump off from this whatever boundaries that society put, and you have a freedom to express whatever the world you want to be. So I don't plan out that much, because the reason why is when I photograph in the location, I look around and I just feel for it. So there are lots of balance and intricacy, and I'm sensitive soul at the same time, but also very open-ended, open-minded when I'm out there.
Yeah, I think that, you know, going on that idea of having kind of two worlds or two facets, because I think anyone who knows Minnie knows that she is a very hard worker, very diligent, very dedicated to her craft, but there also is this other side of her that's really beautiful and fun as well. And she's definitely someone who, at least in my experience, seems to actively avoid the idea of a comfort zone. Like, you are constantly pursuing these different residencies, putting yourself in different situations, if it's different media, different spaces, working, collaborating with different artists who themselves work in different media. You know, you're not just limited to visual art. There's poetry, there's other things that fold into it. I'm wondering specifically, you know, with your personal background, growing up in Korea, but being educated in the United States, having done these residencies in Europe and Asia, across the US, what has kind of the role of travel or your exposure to different places, different cultures done to sort of shape your perspective as a person and as an image?
Well, I traveled a lot when I stayed in New York area, because the reason why, first of all, because I couldn't travel when I was very young. You know, most Korean at the time, working class with a very little discretionary income, so we couldn't really travel. So when I moved to New York, I started traveling different places like Italy extensively, and, you know, France and Japan and all these other places. But the reason why I travel was like that, but I came to the conclusion that we are all human beings living in different places. The landscape is different, and people become different, maybe individual because of due to their landscape or political or social background. But bottom line is that we are all human beings, and feeling this humanity, we all have, our parents and things we have to eat, basic necessities, and things we care. I mean, there are some variations, but I just see everybody as human. So it's very hard for me. Like, I don't like to judge based on people's appearance, how they look like, age or race, because at the end we are all same human being try to survive on this earth. But when I came back from Italy, I did extensive travel in Italy in 2003 or so for like 3 months. And when I came back from Italy, I realized that I don't know much about Korea, because when you are in abroad, everybody asks you, oh, so how's North Korea, South Korea gonna be like? And oh, do you speak same language as China? Or like people ask all kind of thing, but mainly they ask you, oh, how's education in Korea? Like, so I had this basic idea about Korean history, but all the details, I don't know. And I haven't really visited Korea much, but I did extensive travel, backpack travel in Italy. So when I returned from Italy, I went to Korea. I traveled extensively in Korea. So there's that effect. I mean, know yourself first before trying to know other people, same thing with self-portrait. Try to photograph myself before I photograph other people. So yeah, there's a lot of layers to that.
Thank you. And I do want to get to some of these questions coming from the chat. So kind of on that last statement you said about photographing yourself before photographing others. We did have a question from Serge asking if you are photographing other people now. Are you actively shooting portraits or shooting pictures of people besides just the self-portraits?
Are you asking the question towards me or to the audience?
To you, Minny, sorry. Yeah, so question from the chat was just, are you photographing other people now? Are you beyond the self-portrait now that you've kind of taken the time to put the camera on yourself? Have you turned it around to other people?
Yes. So in 2019, I went to Mauna Kea in the Big Island to photograph the mountain, because anybody go up to the Mauna Kea understand what I mean. It is the mountain and the stars, the galaxies. I was overwhelmed. And it happened to be, so 2018, I photographed once. So 2019, I returned to photograph. And then there was a huge gathering on the base of Mauna Kea. Then I realized I really don't know much about this. So I start the next day, not that day. That day I just photographed mountain, I left. The next day I asked these people what's going on here. And they mentioned that about the 30-meter telescope is supposed to start construction, and they're there to protect the mountain. And it was first time me encountering the Hawaiians very closely. And it was, the energy there was just incredible. So over a period of about a year or so, I returned to that place when I could. So it was like every few months or so, I talked to people, I photographed them, and I was feeling very comfortable one-on-one encounter. I interviewed them to give them voice. So it was a video interview. Then I made a portrait of each person, and I made a print and gave to them. The movement stopped due to the COVID, but I have this portrait idea that I like to pursue.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people in this Zoom and elsewhere who would love to see that work once it's kind of ready, ready to share. There was another question from Reed in the chat. So he just wanted you to share with the group a little bit about your most recent residency this summer. Sorry, Minny, you're still muted.
sorry. Okay, sorry. Okay, so last residency was at Dutch Museum of Art in South Korea. I didn't have any slide to show to you because I didn't want to draw too much today. So in May 20 of this year, I arrived at the residency in Dutch Museum. It's kind of sort of mountain, and there's a building inside. And I was doing 2-week quarantine, and it was totally isolated. And then I continued after self-quarantine, few more weeks. And because I was right in the middle of a mountain, and there are a whole universe of insects, every day I was looking at insects. And I didn't know I have that much interest in insects because I was a tree person. If somebody called me Minny Tree because I was making picture of tree for so long. And now I was like totally mesmerized by insects. So I make a note of insect and take a picture, and I kind of Google what kind of insect this would be. And then there's a lot of wild vegetable all around. Because I grew up in countryside, I know lots of these vegetables that you can eat. People who live there in the complex seems not to really pay attention to this wild vegetable, but I know these are all very good for you and you can make a dish out of it. So every day in the morning, I make a morning coffee because I cannot function without coffee. So with a slow, pour down coffee, I go into the backyard. There's a whole kind of garden with insects. So I look at it. I put down my coffee. I set up tripod. I start videotaping this insect. And then I go out, forage all these vegetables. And then I make dishes because there's no restaurant. I have to self-make everything. And then slowly I share this with the neighbors and curators at the museum. And twice I invite Sang Ju, who's the director of the museum, for the lunch. It was all like wild vegetable and miso soup and all this kind of thing. So, and then they asked me to give workshop. And I thought, well, I mean, I've been giving different workshops, but why don't we take nature as our inspiration and make the zine out of it? So there were several people taking workshop. After we kind of brainstorm everything, I asked everybody to go out. And then we just stand under the trees, and I asked people to close their eyes and just listen. And then after a few minutes, open eyes, and we returned to the workshop and we made a zine together and stuff. But it was interesting because for me too, when we went there, I was busy walking to the location where we're gonna stop. But on the way back to the workshop location, I could hear and see everything. It was kind of weird experience. So when you pay attention, there are so many things happening out there. So I knew from the very beginning, maybe I should make a book out of it. So I was very diligent about writing the journals. And also I'm aware of Henry David Thoreau's journaling. He has a 14-volume book. Henry David Thoreau lived by Walden Pond, his mentor, Ralph Waldo Emerson, gave him permission to live by the Walden Pond and try to live sustainable life. So I'm aware of his journaling, but aside from that, I knew if I make a book out of this residency, I need to have the journals, like daily observation. There's something that immediate. Like if I just spend like 40 days and one day I decide to write, it's not gonna be same. So daily observation and making notes was so important. And then slowly I start seeing like wildflowers, and they're tiny little one. And when you look really carefully, they're really beautiful and delicate and very complex design inside. So I start scanning those wildflower as well. So at the end of a residency, I made a 2 book, one with a scanned image and the other one with the journaling and the daily kind of pictures. And these books are right now in the exhibition at the Gwangju Design Biennale, because the theme of like nature, living in nature, and that kind of fit right in. So I'm very grateful that happened. But I'll update my website in the next few weeks. So maybe you can check my website and see pictures of my book.
I wonder, Minnie, if you could just talk a little bit more about sort of the appeal of the format of books for you. One of the first things that that you did at Manoa that I thought was so amazing, besides bringing your coffee machine to the photography studio, which is a great way to become popular with all the photo students, was making a zine of your student work, right? So that the importance of having printed matter, and especially something that's curated into, whether it's a book or a zine, what is the role of that in your work? What do you see the value of having that specific form?
Okay, so book is something that's tangible and it can last a long time. Exhibition comes and goes, very ephemeral. So the book has this more like permanence. But book is such a like universe. You can put so much of yourself into one book. It doesn't have to be just 10 picture or 20 picture. You can put poetry in there. You can use book as a performance. You can use a book as book is a time-based medium. Like you turn the page, time passes from front to back or back to front, but there is a time element to the book, but it's a canvas. Each spread is the one canvas, you know, and you turn the page, there's another canvas. But you can create, the thing I like about book is the experience. You can create the experience with the paper, the texture of paper, right? When you turn the page, certain paper creates different kind of sound. The Keith Smith, who's an amazing book artist, he created this book, I forgot the name, but there's a string, thread, and you can hear the sound of this thread as you turn the page. Like that. So book is, I mean, even if you only put the words inside the book, think about like Herman Hesse's or all these amazing writers' book. It is so visual. And once I encountered the poet in Vermont Studio Center, and she said poetry is image plus sound. So that's just the words in the book. But with me as a photographer, I can use photography and the words and all this and thing. So it becomes very dynamic, and it's a lot of hard work. Every time I make book, I'm so exhausted after several months or several years. I'm like, this will be my last book. But the challenge is so great. Like taking risk, people talk about all the time, taking risk. I mean, take challenge, and each book is challenge. I don't want to repeat myself. Each book is different. How I'm gonna make a different book, different experience. So I think it's addictive in a way because it's so difficult, but at the same time, it's very interesting medium.
Thank you. We are coming up on our time. So Minnie, if there's anything else, closing remarks, anything else you want to say, maybe letting people know where they can find your next or most recent work, anything that we've already mentioned that you want to touch upon, or something that you didn't get to bring up yet.
So if anybody want to say anything, if nobody want to say anything, I'll say the closing remark. But after I say something, if you want to say something, please jump in, because I like to hear from audience. For me, art is great because as an artist, you communicate with the world. I think there's no meaning for me to sit in the studio, make picture and just enjoy it for myself. But the enjoyment comes from corresponding with other people and other people interacting with my work and me kind of discussing with other people about the work. So I'm very grateful for all the years of being artist, but I have to thank everybody who I met from all the classes I took at ICP, and then all the publishers and photographers, and sometimes you meet somebody in the bookstore, you have a 10-minute discussion or something, and that person really have influence on you. So lots of things I made, and I made it, but it comes from all these people I'm encountering, over the years. And I don't want to single out one person's name. There are so many people I don't want to leave out, but it is, I am part of me is all these other people I met along the way who have taught me greatly. So thank you for that. And thank you for joining for today.
Okay, so we do have just some kind of congratulations and other things coming up in the chat. I'm gonna just conclude for Treehouse, but I'll leave the room open. So if anyone does want to unmute themselves and continue conversation with Minny, feel free for the next few minutes. But for the Treehouse portion of today, just want to say thank you again to everyone for joining us. Thank you, of course, to Minny for being with us today and for showing the work here at the shop. For those of you who are based in Honolulu, really encourage you to come see it. In addition to the frame prints that we have up, there's also a number of Minny's books. She also has a video installation and some poetry as well. So it's a fully immersive experience. So thank you everyone for signing in. That's it from Treehouse for today. Again, if any of you want to stay on to talk to Minny, please feel free. I'll leave the room open for you. Aloha.
Anybody want to say anything, please say.
Hi, Minny.
Hi.
That was so good.